anybody there? It seems I'm all alone again. Does anybody care? This planet's empty. I see no signs of life. Please don't tell me that the human race did not survive. There are no people in the future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody, welcome. We are officially in April. We're managed to clear the April Fool's hurdle, and here we are. It is Monday, April 3rd, 2023. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Out to Coop Live. This is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. Excuse me. On Out to Coop Live, we talk to progressives, activists, and troublemakers of all sorts, right from our own backyards from across the country. You can also join us at the end of the week for our Friday Politics Roundup, where we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. You can get all our shows by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can help support the show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. $5 a month. It's freaking awesome. Come on, you can jump in. You can also help out the show by heading over. That's actually, you want to help out $5 a month, head on over to patreon.com/rcpress. But you can help with the show right now by heading over to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. And for more PA Progressive Talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern, wherever you get your streams, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you're going to go. And make sure you subscribe to his podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Go to ricksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms. And if you haven't already, you got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast. The amazing PA women stirring the political culture behind this podcast rock the house. And they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus. That's at The Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't heard, well, you haven't been listening, I guess. The Signal is a new podcast from the Bucks County Beacon. The Signal is hosted by the Beacon's editor-in-chief, Cyril Michaleko, and produced by yours truly. Twice a month, The Signal will shine a light on the right-wing extremist currents streaming through Bucks County and beyond. Cyril invites guests who can provide insight, analysis, and organizing solutions so that we can steer the community through calmer, saner, progressive routes. Check out the podcast at buckscountybeacon.podbean.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Coming to Apple Podcasts real soon. We're working out the last kinks on that one. Everywhere else you get your podcasts, you're going to find The Signal. Do check it out. We just recorded 2 amazing interviews that you are not going to want to miss, so pay attention. And attention all you gamers out there, the Game Inn, that's with 2 N's. The Game Inn is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they've got everything for Retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops. And kids get discounts when they get A's in the report card. How can you beat that? Check them out on their Facebook page and follow them on Twitter at The Game Inn. If you got a question about a game, look for something hard to get, shoot them a message or drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. And a special shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at @SongADayMan. That's with 2 N's, at @SongADayMan on Twitter. And things are heating up. That's why we cannot let Paul Martino and his oligarch friends buy our schools and push extremist politics in our community. Raging Chicken has teamed up with Levelfield to launch a truly community-rooted PAC to invest in organizing, supporting local and statewide progressive candidates, and unmasking the toxic organizations injecting our communities with right-wing extremism. We're putting small dollar donations to work to beat back the power of big money, and you can get more information and drop your donation at ragingchicken.levelfield.net. Well, tonight I'm very excited. This week I'm welcoming Karen Feridun back to the show. Karen is the founder of Berks Gas Truth and co-founder of the Better Path Coalition. Better Path Coalition are the organizers for the PA Climate Convergence. Yes, we'll be talking about that tonight. We'll be talking also about a renewed push for hydrogen to power a green economy, coupled with initiatives for carbon capture and storage. Sounds great, right? Well, we'll get to the truth of the matter, I think. And this October, the PA Climate Convergence will bring advocates, activists, and concerned residents to Harrisburg to tell Governor Shapiro, lawmakers, and regulators that they are having the wrong conversation on climate and need to change their stance. We'll talk about why lawmakers are keeping PA from being part of the solution to the climate crisis and what all of us can do to change that. Well, everybody, I want to welcome to the show Karen Feridun. Karen Feridun, welcome back to the show. I'm so happy to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be back with you.
Well, it's super. Well, listen, before we launch into the stuff really that's going on here in PA and the stuff around hydrogen and carbon capture, although there's some overlap here, I'm just curious about your take on, what we've just heard from the IPCC once again. The latest kind of summer report was just released. As much as the press release that came out of that was trying to paint a rosy picture of what we're facing, and I think that there's some truth to that. If you want to say like humans caused this so humans can change it, okay, I'll buy that as a positivity. But everything else in the report seemed pretty sobering, if you will. So I'm just kind of curious to get your thoughts on what we just saw from that report and what you think. Why you think we need this action now?
Well, it's really important to recognize that the IPCC report occurs over a number of years. This was the sixth cycle, but it started in 2019. And so it's been going for some time, and over the course of those years, they've written 6 reports. The last one is the one that just came out like 2 weeks ago. It's the synthesis report that synthesizes all those other reports that have been written. And so those are the reports, those earlier ones are the ones that are written by the scientists. And there's a lot more truth in a lot of those reports than there is in the synthesis report, because that's the one that becomes highly politicized. That's the report that contains the summary for policymakers, where they try to put it into as plain a language as they possibly can, but that's also the one that gets negotiated by different governments. And so in order for them to put the thing out on time or in any kind of time frame, they have to come to consensus. And so as recently as the Thursday, or as late in the process as the Thursday before the Monday when it was released, I had heard from people who were actually there that they were so far, like I think 75% away from being in agreement, that they really weren't thinking they were going to make the deadline. And by Sunday night, they had concluded all of their meetings and had come to agreement, and they were able to get the report out on time. However, the people who had already made their travel plans, and a lot of those people were from developing countries, they had to leave. So they couldn't be there for the entire process. And that was very upsetting to them. One was choking back tears, according to one of the reports, talking about how, this is supposed to be an inclusive process, and we're the most vulnerable. We're the ones who are going to be experiencing this stuff and already are more than anybody else, and we're cut out of the process now. And so there's this really excellent report that has a play-by-play that talks about everything that was happening in those negotiations. And it was very clear, and it wasn't just Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia worked very hard in those last hours to make sure that the language on fossil fuels was softened, and that they were going to be talking up carbon capture and storage, actually. So they were pushing for that kind of stuff. And what's really unfortunate is that, the report itself is still pretty dire when you read about how, these things are happening to the planet and aren't going to be reversible. And if we don't do something, we're going to hit 1.5 sooner than we think. There's all these scary things in the report. And that's actually a conservative view, the one that they were able to agree upon. And so they like to talk about, like you were saying, some of it's positive, how we've made some improvements, and we have. I mean, the world is moving slowly in the right direction, but the news is terrible. And anything that you saw that sounded terrible out of that report, do it like times a million, because they really soft pedaled a lot of the worst news in that thing. And so we are really, truly out of time.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I was thinking about that report a lot. And if I were to take the best case scenario, like if I were to, say that all those players that were putting together the report, like were in it to really try to put together something was good. And again, that's a fictional world. I understand that. Right. But even if they were, I mean, I can appreciate how difficult it would be to balance the absolute catastrophe that we're facing with trying to like not get people so cynical that they're going to believe that there's nothing that we can do. I mean, and again, the fossil fuel industry has put us in this situation where to butt up against the point where people were just going to throw up their hands and say there's nothing that we can do. And so, I mean, I get that balancing act, right? I mean, I can understand that, but nonetheless, you know, really, it was one of those reports where you scratch the surface, and right below the surface are pretty dire warnings. And I kept on thinking about this sign I had put up on my office door, right after, I don't know if it was 2018 or 2019, where the report came out and said, look, we've got 12 years. We've got 12 years to turn the ship. And I put up this thing that says, we have 12 years left. And I put that up on my office door and have been scratching off the years ever since. And it was like 5 years ago or so. Yeah. So, I mean, it, you know, I don't know what to say to that, right? Other than, you know, that's kind of where I sit and where I was left with that report.
Yeah. I mean, the good news, even from people who, you know, are reputable figures in this world of, you know, climate science and, you know, people who are authorities on it who have studied it closely, still believe that we have time to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. That, you know, but what it would take would be something that requires the kind of courage we don't see in our government. And in fact, we see quite the opposite. You know, we see what Biden just did by approving the Willow Project. You know, right. I mean, we're moving in the wrong direction in a way that we really don't have to. We need every second of that time that we have left. So it's possible to do it. It's still within the realm of possibility we can avoid the worst impacts. But boy, are we not making the right steps or taking the right steps that we need to do that, to take advantage of all that time. And so we actually last summer, talking about the Pennsylvania Climate Convergence, the last thing we did there on the Monday of our, you know, third day of our actions, we installed a climate countdown clock in the Capitol, and it's still there. And we sign up to have it back there every month so that it never leaves. So that every time they're going down to the cafeteria, you know, the little restaurant there on the East Wing to have lunch with their lobbyist friends, they have to see that clock, and they have to see that the seconds are ticking down. And so we intend to leave it there. It's the second biggest clock, the climate countdown clock of its kind in the Americas, actually. The only one that's bigger is the one in Union Square, New York City. So we actually have the second biggest clock in the Americas in that capital where it needs to be.
Well, you know, and Pennsylvania is a good place for it, right? I mean, the place where the first oil well was drilled, right? Place where the kind of Marcellus shale boom kind of took place. They, you know, the context that gave birth to Berks Gas Truth, right? I mean, all this stuff. So it's a good place for it. But, you know, I guess the other piece of good news, right, is that, you know, hydrogen and carbon capture are going to save us all, right? So that we don't have to worry about it. Right?
Yeah, it turns out it's simple. We don't actually have to do anything differently, as it turns out. Yay.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, it's good having you on tonight, Karen. Thanks so much. We'll see you later. No, but I mean, you know, I remember the time like when hydrogen was really being talked about as, you know, as a real possibility of what we need. Right. And I don't want to take to hydrogen and just put hydrogen in kind of like an all or nothing camp here. Right. Because just say, let's be clear about that. But walk us into, I mean, you've been drawing attention to this now about, you know, the problems with the approach with this hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. Can you first kind of talk a little about kind of what that issue is, and then we can get into some of the issues that are involved with it?
Yes. So there have been a couple of bills passed in the past couple of years. One of them was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the other one was the Inflation Reduction Act. And both of those bills throw billions and billions of dollars at hydrogen. And Jennifer Granholm, who's now the chair, or the secretary rather, of the Department of Energy, she talks very enthusiastically about starting a hydrogen economy, and that's what we need to build. And that all sounds great, except that a lot of these things that we are throwing all this money at don't exist yet. And there are good reasons to believe that some of them will never be viable. So let me explain what that means. So hydrogen is not something that you go and extract. It's produced. And so the way you produce hydrogen is from other kinds of energy sources, like fuels, like natural gas. And so they've actually color-coded hydrogen to explain its feedstock and the production process that's used. And so in the case of hydrogen, there are different colors like pink referring to nuclear. So if it's produced from nuclear energy, it's called pink. If it's produced from entirely renewable energy sources, it's called green hydrogen. But the kind that we're talking about here in Pennsylvania is called blue. Now, the one that is responsible for, providing 99, 95, 99%, depending on who's giving you the number, of the hydrogen that's out there today, that is characterized as gray. And so gray hydrogen is the one that comes from methane. So it means lots of fracking, lots of drilling. The process that's used is called something like, it's called steam methane reforming. So that's the process that's used to take the methane and heat it up, separate it out, and get the hydrogen and so forth. But the problem is that, again, that requires a whole lot of methane to be produced in order to have the feedstock, and then it's still very dirty because there's a lot of carbon emissions from the process. So what they've done to make it a greener, healthier, planet-friendly process is to tack on carbon capture and storage, with the idea that the carbon capture and storage process is going to capture the carbon emissions. And so, great, now it's clean. Well, no, because there's nothing in the process that addresses the methane emissions themselves, which are incredibly dangerous. Methane, when it hits the atmosphere, is 86 times more powerful than carbon dioxide when it hits the atmosphere. It's that much better at insulating, the atmosphere, warming temperatures. And so the fact that we have so little time left, this is not the time to be contributing methane to the problem. That's why we should be banning fracking. That's why we shouldn't be doing it at all. So now to use it as a feedstock and require even more of it to be produced makes no sense, because there's nothing at all in the process that mitigates those emissions, captures them, does anything with them. So the problem is, though, in the end, too, that you're not really capturing the carbon. So the carbon capture and storage piece of it doesn't work either. And so what's supposed to happen is that they're supposed to capture all this carbon. Now, the way that they do it is to fuel the process with methane. So now there's more methane involved. Now the carbon is supposed to be captured, is supposed to be put into these pipelines, a whole new generation of pipelines, very costly, very dangerous pipelines, sent to some place where it's going to be injected into the earth, sequestered, and it's supposed to stay there forever. Now, there's no proof of any of this. It's unproven. It's not worked where they have tried it. I think there are about 13 projects. If you look on the list of carbon capture projects around the country, all of them, except for two, involve something called enhanced oil recovery. So the idea, and they've been doing this for decades, they've been capturing carbon so that they can inject it into the earth to get more oil out. That's what these carbon capture and storage, processes have been. Not so much the accent on the storage, mostly about capture and using it for what they call EOR, enhanced oil recovery. So problem is that now that they say, well, now we're just going to sequester it, we're not going to use it for that. There's only one business, and that's an ADM facility, one of those Archer Daniel Midlands, I think, ethanol plant in Decatur, Illinois, that says...
Yeah, they donate to PBS, right? So they're the good people,
so
right?
They're good guys. Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
No, so they say that they're sequestering everything at their facility, except they're not, because they're only managing to capture just a small part of what they actually admit, and that's what's being sequestered. They're doing it at a phenomenally expensive cost. They're still way over budget trying to do this at all. And again, there's no guarantee that it's staying in the ground once it's sequestered. So it's generally been a failure. And so to build this entire hydrogen economy around blue hydrogen is a huge mistake. In Pennsylvania, unfortunately, that's exactly the kind that they're talking about producing here. So what the Department of Energy did is they set up these, what they're calling hydrogen hubs. So they have this money that they're dedicating to establishing these hydrogen hubs around the country. And what's happening this week, on this Friday, April 7th, is the deadline for applications to be submitted by different parties that want to create these hydrogen hubs where they are. And one of the requirements by the Department of Energy was that at least two of them have to be in places where there's a lot of natural gas. And so, and they have different requirements for different parts of the country. But basically, I mean, where are they going to find more natural gas than just a couple of places in this country? Texas,
Right.
The Gulf being one of them, Pennsylvania and the Appalachian region being the other. And so surely we are going to get some kind of a blue hydrogen hub, which is the last thing that we need. But that's what looks like we're going to have. There are 3 projects that Pennsylvania is involved with at minimum. They're not disclosing what all the applications are, but if the applicants disclose themselves, then we hear about them. And so there's a big one that's being proposed in Pittsburgh area, but that would also pertain to the rest of Appalachia. They'd all be working together. And then there's another variant of that that's being centered in West Virginia. And conversely, then Pennsylvania would be part of their hub. And then there's another one that's in Philadelphia, and that would be Philadelphia, Southern Jersey, and Delaware. And so right in this region, we are already on the books for having at least 3 hubs that we might be a part of if, at least one of them is selected. So that means, again, we're off to the races with lots more, not just lots more fracking to get all of the methane that they would need, but also lots more infrastructure development. So now we're going to see lots more pipelines coming through, lots more, injection wells. They're terribly dangerous things. Just lots and lots more infrastructure. And then there's the hydrogen infrastructure too, and the processing facilities. And we're just going to see lots of new stuff coming, in addition to the businesses that believe that they can take advantage of this to produce whatever they want to do with the hydrogen.
Well, and the politicians too, right? Because the politicians are looking at this from the jobs perspective, right? It's an easy sell, right? Especially because it tracks the well-worn path that we're familiar with, right? As these things have been. So when you say pipelines mean jobs, pipelines mean good union jobs. This is how the argument goes, right? And we all know that the history of that argument in Pennsylvania has been a complete bust, right? Because the jobs that are around for a short period of time, and they don't measure up to the long-term impacts and costs that are put on communities, right? The loss of jobs, the loss of infrastructure, especially when, the gas prices tank. So we've seen this happen again and again and again. And frankly, as you were talking about what was happening with the carbon capture and the hydrogen, this sounds like a balance sheet solution to a real world problem, right? So in other words, if I can make an argument to those folks who are concerned that, we need to do something about the climate, right? Or my constituents at least are really concerned that we need to do something about the climate. I need to demonstrate to them that what we're going to do in this hydrogen economy is going to kind of a net zero emitter. And if you could show that on a balance sheet, even if it's a lie, right? Then, again, most people are not paying attention to the details of this, but all we get to see are the kind of the smoke and mirrors and the dog and pony show. But in the meantime, like you're just saying, we're kind of like pouring fuel on the fire of the climate crisis.
Exactly. Well put about, the balance sheet approach to doing this, because that's exactly what it is. It's, again, it's not that there's any sort of, proven scalable technology involved in any of this. Even the other kind of hydrogen, the one that's the best option out there, is green hydrogen, the one that's completely made from renewables. But the cost involved in trying to do that, and the amount of energy it takes to make hydrogen from completely renewable sources, it's so much that it would actually be more efficient and cheaper to just use the methane as methane, or just use the electricity as electricity in the case of green hydrogen. It's so expensive to do this that it just makes no sense. And so, so this hydrogen shot is what Granholm calls it, trying to bring down the cost of producing hydrogen. And that all sounds great, but the way I look at it is that right now we have an 80% problem and a 20% problem. So what they're saying for the expensive processes like green hydrogen, even, that might not be the thing that we'll ever use to heat our homes, but it's the thing that we can use for those hard to abate sectors. So it would have some limited utility, if it has any at all. And so, we have an 80% problem and a 20% problem. But if you look at just the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and look at the way that the money was allocated in that one bill, 80% of the money goes to the 20% problem, and 20% of the money goes to the 80% problem. So in that bill, $20 billion was directed toward hydrogen carbon projects, and only $480 million was directed at renewables, all renewables combined. And so it makes no sense when they don't have to be tested out. They don't have to be proven, and they don't have to become scalable. They are proven. They are scalable right now. That money is needed to deploy them. We need to actually deploy those things. And they're not dedicating that money to it. Instead, they're throwing the vast sums of money at things that may be worth, researching and developing and refining for the future. But right now, we have an 80% problem, and it's getting virtually, none of the money. It's getting 20%. That's nothing.
So tell me if I'm wrong about this. So this is kind of how I hear this, and this is trying to get my around this whole idea. Because to an everyday person, where you're talking about, say, green hydrogen, right? And to say that it's immensely costly and all this stuff. And then you can say, well, okay, maybe that's where we have to have really significant government subsidies of the renewable infrastructure in order to produce the hydrogen. Like that's kind of like what I hear happening in those bills. And what I keep on, I can't help but draw analogies between the bank bailouts and what we're seeing here. And so the way I think about it is like this, is like, okay, we have a direct route. So the bank bailouts, you give the money to the people who have mortgages so people don't lose their homes or go underwater, or you send the money to the biggest corporations, the banks who actually cause the problem. You send it to them, and in the hopes that it will trickle down right on this. It's this classic story. And here with the hydrogen thing, it seems like, okay, even if we want green hydrogen, and it's going to take a bunch of kind of public spending in order to do that, well, why wouldn't we spend the money on just producing clean energy for people as opposed to going through an industry, right? I can't help but see this as the plan and the play being made by the oil and gas industry and related industries to basically say, this is our ticket to keep the subsidies coming in our direction, to keep our profits, to keep our power, right, as we make this transition. Because they're not fools, right? They know that they want to burn everything they can in order to kind of get to that next stage when they can do it. And they want the public money to go to them, as opposed to actually the people that need it. Because it seems to be, it'd be a lot more direct to just put solar panels in everybody's house, right? To actually have community community solar farms that would fund to put solar panels on the top of every freaking flat school roof that you could find. I mean, am I wrong about that? Because that's what it seems like to me.
You're exactly right. And it's even worse because what has happened in the course of the last couple of years is a tax credit called 45Q has been expanded wildly. And it's so impossible for the IRS and or EPA to try to track who's all taking advantage of this, because it can be transferred. I mean, it's the whole thing, if you look into it, is completely bonkers. But it represents so much money that will not be coming into the government because it's a tax credit. So they just, they can take the tax credit, and that means that you and I, have to make up for it somehow, And so, it's like pigs at the trough, for real. I mean, they're just lining up to try to take advantage of this thing, and they're not even, really hiding it. Like, there are projects that you hear about coming into even Pennsylvania where, you hear the people who are, running these companies, these little startups, they're talking about, waiting to see what's happening with 45Q. And so what I really think is going to happen, and we've seen it with the petrochemical boom in Pennsylvania to a large extent, as bad as it is, it could have been so much worse. It was supposed to be so much worse. So I don't know if you've been following what goes on in western Pennsylvania and Beaver County, where they have the Shell cracker plant. But, that's a plant where they crack open ethane molecules to get the ethylene out to make plastics. And so that's why they call it a cracker. It cracks open the molecule. There were supposed to be 5 of those plants in Pennsylvania, and instead we ended up with 1. And so I have a feeling that whatever happens, we're going to end up with something terrible that comes out of this hydrogen experiment. But what's really going to happen, I think, is that it's mostly a trial balloon, and that, they're going to see,
interesting,
if it's something worth doing. And so in the end, we'll end up with some bad stuff, terrible stuff that will really do a lot of harm wherever it is. But we're not going to end up with as much as we think. But what will have happened is we will have wasted every last minute we had. And
so do we have? Yep. Sorry.
And all those parties will get rich in the process of taking their tax credits.
Right, and we're all kind of left at square one, right? Kind of hoping that we're not going to be on the receiving end of the worst aspects of the climate crisis. So do we have a sense of who are the people that are pushing for this? What kind of politicians or folks that are kind of lining up behind this? Because it seems to me, again, you're the expert on this one. It seems to me that this is not a strictly partisan issue, but that we have Democrats, Republicans across the kind of party line who are kind of lining up behind this idea. And I even get the sense that some Democrats, or quite a few Democrats actually, see this as a way of, say, placating their kind of traditional kind of oil and gas folks, right, by saying, don't worry about it, things are going to be fine. And at the same time, being able to kind of cloak themselves in the kind of, the green mantle of pro-climate. But so, I mean, where are folks lining up around this? And, this is obviously, I want to kind of move to talk about where we put pressure on this and what coming up with the PA Climate Convergence, why this is important. But to give us a lay of the land, if we're looking at the PA legislature, looking at the governor's office, where do things stand in Pennsylvania in terms of the government?
Yeah, I mean, that's been one of the very depressing things about this, because at the beginning, I mean, given what was going on with the federal government and those bills that were being passed, and the Manchin was the holdout, but that they were trying to get these things done, it's really been something that was more pushed by the Democrats than the Republicans. In fact, at first, I would hear things out of the Republican Party where they were kind of opposed to it because they hadn't gotten their marching orders yet, apparently, that, this is what we want, And so, they were reacting against things like pore space, which is like the eminent domain issue of carbon capture. Do you own those cavities underneath your home where they could store carbon, or do they own it? Can they take it from you? And Republicans generally hate anything about land being taken from people. They at least care about property rights. And so, things like that were off-putting. And then all of a sudden everybody was for it because then they got, that, oh no, you're supposed to be for this. But, but really it was Democrats who were more enthusiastic about it than anybody. And that was really scary because, not only, do people tend to just, listen to their politician of choice and just believe what they say, but there was so much greenwashing with this. It really was cast as something that really is the solution and is all green and all good. And look, we're putting solar panels on the campus where we're producing the hydrogen, so we're even greener, and you should love this. And we're going to compost all the poop at lunchtime. It's like, oh my God, it's like it was just sounding all too good to be true, and too many, people were just kind of taking it hook, line, and sinker. And so what we've done, and we can talk about this, when we talk more about the convergence and stuff, but sure, what we've started doing this year is monthly, briefings, and we've been inviting elected officials to attend them and staffers, and I'm thrilled to say that we've gotten lots and lots of people attending our briefings that we have, as like virtual brown bag briefings, to hear from the experts that none of this is really true and none of this is really going to work, and we really just have to go do the hard job of transitioning away from fossil fuels, period.
Right.
And so I don't know that it's going to end up making the difference, but that's exactly where we feel that we need to be at this point, is just trying to get the real story out there as much as we possibly can.
Well, it does seem like this. I mean, I'm glad you just said that, because I was going to ask you about what you thought of what was the possibility of actually persuading particular lawmakers and things like this. Because it seems to me that there's, okay, maybe I don't want to sound too starry-eyed here, right? But it seems to me that there's some people that genuinely believe that this was a good thing, right? And I think about the folks who genuinely believe that natural gas was truly a transition fuel, right? Now, we know all the problems behind that, but I remember like the campaign of, the blue flame, right? And that it burns cleaner. And so our focus was on that point of ignition, not everything else, but it was like, what's the emission from that blue flame? And here the image is the water dripping out of your tailpipe, right? I mean, the hydrogen is like, it produces only water, right? I mean, just water vapor or drips of water. And so I could imagine they're kind of just perfectly, people who would be behind it were kind of, sold from that, but that have the potential or would be potentially persuaded once they start to really dig into the science. I mean, are you finding that happening in those briefings and other lobbying efforts?
I have to say that, yes. I mean, I haven't heard anybody specifically say,
I've had awakening, right?
Right, yeah. You completely maybe rethink this.
Sure.
However, I have had legislators come up to me and thank me for having these things because they feel like they're getting the facts and they're writing and asking us to get the studies that are behind it. And so it feels like, there's a, like you said, some percentage of the population there that did kind of buy it hook, line, and sinker, wanted to, because I want to. It sounds so appealing that we could do something as simple as use hydrogen and harness that power to, to fix so much of our, not maybe everything, but take care of a lot of things. No, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, but I understand the appeal of it. And so I think that, I think legitimately there were a lot of people like that. And then I think there were a lot more people who knew nothing about any of it. I mean, we got a lot of new legislators in Harrisburg this year, and they don't know, necessarily anything about this if they haven't been tracking it. And to be honest, it's not that easy to know about, because if you are not reading national press, you're never going to hear about it in Pennsylvania. It's one of my huge frustrations with, the way the media works in the state these days, because of, I guess, the relatively few number of owners of media. And, it takes independents like you to get the real story out there. And so it's just not getting covered. And so, so it's really easy to not know about it. And I think the vast majority of the population doesn't know about it. And if they know something, they heard something good from the politician of their choice, period. And so we have a lot of educating to do, because it's not just going to be us doing a few briefings that's going to, persuade anybody. It's going to take pressure from the public to say, do not make this mistake again. This is exactly the same mistake we made with fracking. And we did no studies in the state before letting it come in. Nothing. I mean, it's just, here we go again. And I really feel like, I know a lot of us do who have been in this for a while. We feel like, we're catapulted back about 20 years to when all this was beginning. And they just kind of went into it blindly, and here we go again. Have we learned nothing from that experience? And apparently we have not learned anything.
Well, it's like, we learn about the specific thing, but don't recognize the narrative, it seems, right? Don't recognize the story that is being told again and again and again, the patterns of how this stuff happens. So that while people have learned about the specific thing called natural gas and fracking and its impacts, which took tons of work, people like you and activists and kind of, people fighting for this stuff and making sure that got heard, to like, okay, we got that. But then we see the brand new thing comes along, and we just seems like we forget the whole narrative again. And I think there's, a lot of us have been going through that kind of cycle, not just with climate, but with a lot of things, right? We're seeing that the media is certainly not learned. It's still going to follow the drama story more than it's going to follow, the hard truths that we need to do on climate. And frankly, it's a hard story to tell, right? I mean, because we're talking about, shifting the economy away from fossil fuel economy that will impact everybody, right? And the question is like, and the worst thing about it is the longer we wait, like the worse the impact is going to be on the most vulnerable people to begin with, right? I mean, which is why we need people coming out and kind of, yes, educating the legislators, but also making these moments where we're kind of like opening up a kind of like the media window to be able to try to get some attention on this. And this is what you did last year with the PA Climate Convergence, which killed me that I couldn't get my own act together to have you on before that one. But now we've got another work on PA Climate Convergence coming up this fall, which promises to be one of these kind of moments, right? So can you talk a little about what that is, like a little bit about how that was last year and where things are going and what the plans are and how you think that, we can actually have an impact here?
And I appreciate being able to talk about it, because we're so excited that we came up with this kind of crazy idea last year, and it worked. So the idea was not simply to have this one-off event, but to have this one-off event that it was unique in that it was a 3-day event, be the beginning of a campaign. And so the campaign continues right now, even though we're planning another event coming up, a 2-day event this time in October. We're not stopping in between. We're continuing to do actions every month, and those briefings are part of it. We're also doing what we call a people's filibuster, where we stand there in the Capitol and we read the IPCC report, because if they're not going to read it, we might as well read it to them, And so we're doing all these different kinds of action all the time to just to be the drumbeat. And it takes a lot of drummers to be the drumbeat, But we feel like we need to be able to do it as best we can because we do want to change the conversation. So part of that happens in the Capitol, but part of it also happens in the city of Harrisburg, to have cultural events and other things like that. And so when we have the Pennsylvania Climate Convergence the first day, for the first one, and again, this year was a festival and will be again. So it's almost like an Earth Day festival, so that it's something approachable, but people who might go to an Earth Day festival but might never go to a protest or a rally. So we wanted, the public to be comfortable coming in. We wanted to talk about all of the issues. We also wanted to have, like performances, music, and things that all just create this festival atmosphere. And a big part of what we wanted to do was related to art. So we wanted to use art in various ways. So one of them was to put that climate clock in the Capitol. We called that an art installation. If you call it art, you can put it in the Capitol for months at a time. If you call it activism, they'll remove it by the next morning.
Right.
So we used the term art to refer to our installation at the Capitol, but we wanted to use it in other ways. For instance, one of the things that we did was we set up what would typically be held the night before the big march, which we did in the second day of our convergence last summer. We had an art build. You typically do that in the evening before you go march, where you're making all the banners and the posters and everything. But we did it at the festival so that the average person coming through could help create the art. And then the idea was that if they're invested enough in having helped make it, maybe they'll come help carry it. And so we did that. And we also wanted the art to be our footprint that we could leave behind. And also the thing that we can call upon, when we can't all be there, to have some kind of an art installation in town or something, just so that there's always some suggestion of climate. Everywhere you go, you're going to hear about climate. So that it gets into their heads that it's a thing, and we need to be worried about this. And so just like last Friday night, we had a woman, Patty DeMarco from Pittsburgh, who I think she was the director at one point of the Rachel Carson Homestead, but she has since gone to Chatham University, where she also specializes in Rachel Carson. But she has written a book. And so we had a completely cultural event. We weren't sending any kind of message to Harrisburg, politicians, but we were having a cultural event about climate change and about Rachel Carson and about, environmentalism and just trying to always keep that subject in the ether. And so, we do this because what the industry has been doing to us for a very long time is sort of what they admittedly call psyops, where they do these things like in Western Pennsylvania. If you drive down the turnpike, you start to see these signs about how great carbon dioxide is and how much we love our carbon dioxide, and they're not there to persuade anybody. They're just there to be ubiquitous, to be the wallpaper of our lives, and so it's just how we think about ourselves. This is who we are. This is where we live. That's what we want to do in Harrisburg. And so that's how we started with the convergence. That's what we're continuing this year with all of our various actions, and we'll have again in October, the next one will be like the big event. And we actually did get from an anonymous donor funding to have these for 5 years. So 5 more years.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So we're really excited that we can just keep it up and keep the conversation going there and just do more and more and more as we get more and more members to help us. But what we managed to do last time was have just a ton of fantastic panels where we expanded out from what we do as the Better Path Coalition, which is very focused on fossil fuel side of things, especially natural gas. What we wanted to do as the Pennsylvania Climate Convergence was also create a new network to build our movement, to show that, if you're fighting a warehouse, you're one of us. We're all fighting the same battles, and they're very similar battles when you start really looking at them closely. And so we wanted to show that climate is not just about fossil fuels, it's about everything. And it's about environmental justice in a huge way, obviously. And there are lots of organizations that focus on that. But it's about warehouses, it's about immigration, it's about just you name it, PFAS chemicals. Just everything in the end is a climate story, and we need to tell it together with one voice to say that's why we need to do something now. That's why we need to do a hell of a lot better now than we're doing. And we're not just not moving in the right direction; we're moving in the wrong direction.
Right.
Hugely important that we stop doing that.
Yeah. I mean, I've said this 1,000 times in this podcast. I have 2 kids in middle school, and this was true. I cared about this stuff obviously before I ever had kids, but I think about that every day. I mean, the urgency is just there. Everything, every day that something doesn't happen, their lives are going to get worse in the long run. And that's not, pessimism. That's just fact and science, right? I mean, and again, the frustration is always, we know what to do. I mean, we know what to do. We have the tools to do it. It's just about, having the political will and the willingness to do this. And, I really like this idea of, about keeping climate in the discourse, because you're right. I mean, they've flooded the zone with, keep calm and carry on kind of thing, right? I mean, that's their, that's like, just keep, filling your tank with fuel and blah, 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 keep on going. And, I thought about this, because obviously we talk also a lot about, the craziness happening in the school boards, right? All this stuff. And now we just saw in Kutztown, right? You had Alan Gratz's book being effectively banned from that, or they shut down the program because you have these kind of extremists, the anti-climate, the climate deniers who say, no, we don't want our kids learning about climate. And it got me thinking about it is like, I think the responses are generally, understandable. Like you was what's going on here? And you want to talk about all the reasons why they shouldn't be banned and all this stuff. That's really good. But I, also start thinking like, what would it look like to start going to school boards and things like this with proposals like, hey, we need to put solar panels on the roofs of all of our schools. Right. And we could feed that because our schools basically sit vacant for the entire summer. Like when the sun is its hottest, the sun is shining the most. This could actually be kind of generational, pay for itself in a very short period of time and generate that back to the community to basically make sure that the farmers that are right down the street have kind of basically free access to power because we need to produce our food locally. Right. And kind of getting at those issues that you were talking about is, climate is not just like the emissions going into the air. It's everything right now. Yeah.
And, and there's lots of good news in it, in that we are seeing, even in a state like Pennsylvania, we're seeing so many green jobs that are developing. And so, it's hard to have a leg to stand on if you're defending fossil fuels, because it's not even the jobs creator that they've always tried to make it out to be. It never has been. It's like the real way forward is so clear. And we're just not going in that direction because it doesn't suit the fossil fuel industry and our, lily-livered electeds who don't want to, go up against the guy who, finances their campaign. It's just, it's terrible. And so, just to circle back to that ADM plant in Decatur, Illinois, that whole thing with all that carbon capture and all that nonsense with ethanol, blah, 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 it employs 12 people.
There you go.
So why don't we do the thing that employs everyone? Why don't we get communities involved? And why don't we, what it would take to do the build out just in the first place is huge. And we could do so much. We could have everybody working, and we could have everybody working at something that isn't a death sentence, because that's the other thing that is completely insane about what we do. The people who work in these trucks and do this drilling, and they are exposed to every lousy thing in the world. I have a hearing problem, so I always have the most blaring sound on my phone. I apologize for that, but I
want that as a sound drop on my sound drop. I think that's awesome. I love it. But it's just horrifying, the stories that we hear from gas workers, who are around this stuff, and they're not told to wear protective clothing. You see these guys hopping around in trucks, cleaning them out. That's their job. They're touching all this stuff and they're exposed to it, and there's no protection. So, why not create a whole generation of jobs that, aren't a death sentence? And so, there's this great guy, if you haven't read it, Justin Noble for Rolling Stone magazine wrote about all the radioactivity that's in our waste, our drilling waste that just gets, disposed of. And then that's those guys who are working in those trucks, and they don't know what they're up against, and they get sick. And why are we doing that? Why can't we do things better? It's so much easier in the end and cheaper to do things right. Why don't we do it? Yeah. And hopeful, right? It provides a very different, you think about the difference of the vision of like those kinds of possibilities, right? It's nothing but, a vision of hope and possibility, right? Of, rather than, doubling down and kind of, because I worry about what this means, how people get pitted against each other, right? And how the kind of like the move towards demagoguery and authoritarianism just gets worse the more that we don't address this stuff. But let me ask you this. So we've got the kind of make sure that we're not leaving everybody on the kind of like in the doldrums on the end, which I have a tendency to do because I am the dark cloud in every room. But but so one, you got the PA Climate Convergence coming up on October 1st and October 2nd. And there's going to have more information on that, and I hope we can get you on before then too as well. So we got when we're leading up to that, I want to make sure you get people out to that and so on. But if you're to kind of think about where we're at right now, where we're at in terms of, say the climate movement, or even more broadly, kind of the consciousness and action towards this, compared to where we were, say, even 10 years ago, is there reason to be hopeful, not just in an optimistic, caring way, but are you seeing the kind of like movement kind of forming that's pointing in a direction to say, look, we got a shot here, but we've just really got to double down?
Yeah, I mean, I wake up every day excited to do what I do. I don't think that we're going to, go. I think we'll be able to back away from the precipice. It's not going to be perfect. I mean, we've already changed the planet. So, the idea now is to do everything we can to change as little as we can and give the planet a chance to heal and provide a great future for future generations and not make them have to struggle the way we see people struggling already with extreme weather that's just going to get worse. So, we have the possibility of doing all of that. We have the possibility of building a great economy. I mean, I think the way to look at this is that we have this moment that we can seize and make everything better. And so, yes, it's not going to be perfect. Like I said, there are some of the climate impacts that we're not going to be able to reverse, at least anytime soon. Fine. I mean, it's terrible and it shouldn't happen. But we have this moment where we can stop it, where we can say, look at all the good things we can do. We can create a better world for ourselves than we had before. And that's what we need to do together. We just need everybody to, join organizations like ours and organize in your communities. Go to your school board, ask them to put solar panels on the roof. Find out what it takes. Get involved. It's so doable. We just need to do it.
Yeah, it almost sounds like, I don't know, something that's worth fighting for. You know what I'm saying? Well, listen, Karen, I appreciate you coming on so much tonight, and I appreciate all the work that you've always done. I mean, you're always kind of have been on the ground working with lots of people who are just doing kind of crazy amounts of work to keep this kind of front and forward. Want to remind everybody that you want more information about this, go over and check out Berks Gas Truth. You can check them out at gastruth.org. That's gastruth.org. Check out the PA Climate Convergence, all the information about that. There's pictures and there's kind of right up to what happened kind of last year's one, looking forward there. You can find out information about that at www.pennsylvaniaclimateconvergence.org. That's pennsylvaniaclimateconvergence.org. And find out about the Better Path Coalition, who's helping bring this all together by going to www.betterpathcoalition.org. All those will, of course, be linked in tonight's show notes. Do check them out and help out where you can. And, make plans already set aside October 1st and October 2nd. Mark it on your calendar, block it off. This is an opportunity for us to go there, not just kind of to go out and kind of rally and protest like we see in Harrisburg quite often, but to be part of something, to meet people and to actually get glimpses of that hope, of that future that's worth fighting for. So, Karen, I appreciate you so much. And thank you so much for coming on the show tonight.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you and Raging Chicken. You've been such an ally for all these years. I appreciate it.
You got it, Karen. Well, listen, and thank you all for tuning in tonight. And I want to remind you, if you're listening to our podcast, make sure you hit us on that five-star review. Let everybody know about why you come out and you listen to this podcast. It helps other people find the show. If you're watching this on YouTube or you're checking it on YouTube, make sure you like this stream. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast or subscribe to our channel to make sure that you get notifications every time that we go live. Hit that little bell. And in the meantime, you can help us out by heading on over to, patreon.com/RCPress. You can go over, drop us a $5 donation. You can become a patron for $5 a month. That help keeps independent media going, that we're able to bring people like Karen on the show. We have it tonight. Karen, I wish you all the best. Have a great week ahead of you. And it's so great to hear that you get up every morning and look forward to the work that you got to do. That gives me hope too as well.
Thank you. And all the best to you too. And I hope you survive Lytle Fall.
Oh, God. We got a whole other conversation on that. We're happening at Kutztown. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning out tonight. This is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. Remember, head on over to patreon.com/RCPress. Become a patron for as little as $5 a month. We'll be back here pretty soon. Can't wait to tell you who we got coming on. See ya!
Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.